My name is Lieutenant Lewis. For most of my career, I wore my badge with pride, not because it gave me authority, but because it meant something. It meant I stood for the law, for justice, for the kind of principles my own father drilled into me as a boy. And I wasn't just a cop. I was a father. My son, Nathan, was my world. I still remember the way his little hand used to wrap around my finger when I'd walk him to school. The way his face would light up when I'd get home from a long shift and toss a football in the yard. The first time he called me his hero, I swear, I could have carried that moment in my heart for a lifetime. We weren't rich. We didn't take fancy vacations or drive shiny cars. But what we had was something I thought couldn't be broken: trust, respect, love. Nathan was smart. The kind of kid who could take apart a radio just to see how it worked and then put it back together without a single screw missing. He wanted to be an engineer someday. I still have one of his old notebooks filled with sketches of inventions he swore would make us millionaires one day. But life has a way of throwing shadows over even the brightest paths. It started small. First, he'd come home later than usual. Said he was hanging out with new friends from school. I didn't think much of it. Kids grow. They make new friends. But then his grades started slipping. He stopped drawing, stopped talking as much. And when I tried to ask what was wrong, he'd shrug, say I'm fine, and retreat to his room. I could feel him slipping through my fingers. The same hands that once clung to me like I was his anchor now felt distant. One night, I came home early from shift. I saw him outside, leaning against the hood of an old, beat-up car with 3 boys I'd never seen before. They weren't like his usual friends. They had that look, the kind I've seen too many times in my career. Cheap tattoos, cigarette smoke curling in the air, smirks that said they didn't care about anything except their own amusement. When Nathan saw me, his eyes widened for a second, then narrowed, like he didn't know whether to feel guilty or defiant. That was the first time I truly felt fear. Not fear for my safety, but fear for his future. You don't notice the exact moment someone you love starts slipping away. It's not like a switch you can point to and say, this is when it happened. It's gradual, a slow erosion like water wearing down stone. You tell yourself it's just a phase, but they'll bounce back. That love alone is enough to steer them right. But I was wrong. Over the next few months, Nathan's late nights became normal. At first, he'd give excuses. We were just hanging out, Dad. You worry too much. But the excuses got lazier, shorter, until he stopped bothering with them altogether. One Saturday morning, I found a crumpled $20 bill in his jeans pocket, even though I hadn't given him any allowance that week. When I asked where it came from, he said a friend had paid him for helping move furniture. Maybe I could have believed that, if not for the faint smell of alcohol on his hoodie. I wanted to press him harder, but something in his eyes stopped me. They weren't the eyes of a boy who'd made a small mistake. They were guarded, closed off, like he'd built walls between us that I didn't know how to break down. The first real crack came one Friday night. I was on patrol when my radio crackled to life with a call I never expected to hear. Reports of a break-in at a corner store. I wasn't far, so I headed over. When I arrived, the store owner was outside, pacing like a caged animal. The front window had been smashed, and the cash register drawer was hanging open, completely empty. Inside, the shelves were a mess, chips crushed underfoot, candy wrappers littering the floor. And then, I saw it, the grainy security camera monitor in the back office, looping the footage from just 20 minutes earlier. 4 figures, hoodies pulled low, masks covering their mouths. One of them shorter than the rest, moving with a nervous, jittery energy I recognized instantly. It was Nathan. My chest tightened, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. I replayed the footage 3 more times, hoping I was wrong, hoping my mind was tricking me. But it wasn't. I knew my own son's walk, his posture. Even under that hood, I could feel it. The store owner told me the boys had run when the alarm went off, but not before grabbing a few $100s in cash and stuffing their bags with whatever they could carry. I didn't say a word to him about recognizing one of the thieves. I finished my report, got back in my patrol car, and it just sat there, my hands gripping the wheel so tight they hurt. That night, I waited for Nathan to come home. It was past midnight when the door finally creaked open. "Where have you been?" I asked from the shadows of the living room. He froze, his hoodie halfway off. Just out, he mumbled. Out. I repeated slowly. Want to tell me why you smell like stale beer and smoke? Or why your shoes have glass stuck in the soles? His head snapped up. You've been spying on me? My anger flared. Spying? Nathan, I saw you. I was at the corner store tonight. I watched the footage. You want to tell me it wasn't you? His jaw clenched. His eyes darted away. You don't know what you saw. God, that denial cut deeper than any confession could have. I wasn't just fighting for his honesty. I was fighting for the boy I'd raised, the one who used to tell me everything. Over the next week, I kept hoping he'd come clean. He didn't. Instead, I started noticing more troubling signs. Wads of cash in his backpack, a cheap silver chain around his neck that I knew he couldn't afford, and bruises on his knuckles that he brushed off as just messing around. And those friends, the three boys I'd seen him with before, they were always lurking, leaning against the fence when I got home, glaring at me like they owned him now. I knew the type, predators who looked for kids like Nathan. Boys with good hearts, but cracks in their armor. They filled those cracks with cheap thrills and fake loyalty until they had full control. Then came a moment I couldn't ignore. A call came in one night, theft again, but this time from a private home. Jewelry, electronics, cash gone. When I got to the scene, I found a single piece of evidence that made my blood run cold. A baseball cap with the logo of Nathan's favorite team. The exact one I bought him for his birthday last year. I drove home in silence, gripping the wheel so hard I thought it might snap. That night, I stood outside his bedroom door, listening to him laugh and talk on the phone. My son, my flesh and blood, was becoming the kind of criminal I'd spent my life putting behind bars. And that's when I realized something. I couldn't just be his father anymore. I was going to have to make a choice that would break me, but maybe save him. The day that changed everything didn't arrive with a warning. No ominous phone call. No gut feeling in the morning telling me to brace myself. It came quietly, like a shadow slipping under the door. It was a Tuesday night, late autumn, the kind where the wind rattles the windows and you can smell rain coming. I'd just taken off my badge, hung up my gun belt, and sat down with a mug of black coffee when my phone buzzed. The voice on the other end was tight, urgent. Lewis, you might want to sit down. It was a colleague from the department. There'd been a serious break-in, not a petty theft this time, the kind that gets local news coverage. A small family-owned jewelry store, ransacked, thousands in merchandise gone. Security footage showed 4 suspects. I didn't want to ask. I didn't want to know. But my friend hesitated before speaking. Lewis, one of them looked a hell of a lot like your boy. I drove down to the station, each streetlight flashing through the windshield like a ticking clock. The footage was clearer this time. No doubt. No wiggle room for denial. Nathan, hood-up bandana over his face, but his build, his way of moving, the way he adjusted his sleeve mid-action. I'd seen it 1,000 times over the years. And there was the same crew. Same smirks, same recklessness. The owner was distraught. This store had been in his family for 3 generations. The pieces stolen weren't just valuable. They had stories, histories. And now I was staring at my son in the act of destroying that. When I got home that night, Nathan was asleep in his room, sprawled out like he didn't have the weight of the world pressing on him. There was a small bag on the floor near his bed. I opened it slowly. Inside were rings, necklaces, and a single watch still in its display box. My stomach dropped. It wasn't just some random watch. It had been engraved with the store owner's initials. I sat on the edge of his bed, watching him sleep. And for a split second, I saw him as the little boy who used to curl up against me during thunderstorms, asking if I'd keep him safe. Now here he was, asleep in the wreckage of his own making. The next morning, I called in sick. Not because I was ill, but because I couldn't face anyone. My badge had always been a symbol of my integrity. What would it mean if people knew my own son was out there breaking the very laws I swore to protect? I spent the day pacing the house, my mind at war with itself. If I turned him in, he'd be looking at serious time. Juvenile detention at best. Maybe prison if the judge wanted to make an example of him. I knew what those places did to people. They didn't heal, they hardened. They turned boys into something worse. But if I didn't, he'd learn nothing. He'd think he could keep getting away with it. And then a thought struck me, cold, sharp, and unshakable. What if I took the blame? The idea was insane. Self-destructive. But the more I turned it over, the more it felt like the only way. I'd go in as the suspect. I confess. Take the fall. Nathan wouldn't go to prison, at least not yet. He'd have a chance to straighten himself out without the system chewing him up. I told myself it wasn't just for him. It was for the boy I used to know. For the future I still believed he could have. For the belief that maybe, just maybe, a sacrifice that big could shock him into changing. The next day, I went down to the station. My own precinct. My own brothers in uniform. I sat across from the lead investigator, a man I'd shared coffee with countless mornings, and I lied through my teeth. I was there, I said, my voice steady even as my heart pounded. I broke into the store. It was me. The look on his face was pure disbelief. Lewis, this isn't funny. It's not a joke, I said. You have the footage. You can match my build. I'll sign whatever statement you need. I could see the hesitation in his eyes. He didn't want to believe it. But paperwork has a way of burying truth under procedure. By the time I left, I was no longer Lieutenant Lewis, respected officer. I was Lieutenant Lewis, accused felon. The court proceedings were a blur. The prosecution laid out the case like I was a stranger to them. The judge looked at me with disappointment. But it was Nathan's face I couldn't get out of my mind. When the verdict was read, guilty, he sat in the gallery, frozen. His eyes met mine for just a second. And in that second, I saw everything. Shock, guilt, fear. I wanted to tell him it was okay, that I was doing this for him. But all I could do was nod once before they led me away in cuffs. Prison changes a man. Not in the way TV shows make it look, not all fights and power plays. Sometimes the change is quieter. You spend hours alone, replaying the choices that led you there. I thought about my son every day, about whether he hated me for what I'd done, or hated himself for letting me do it. But I also thought about those friends of his, the way they smirked at me, the way they saw my son as a pawn. I knew one thing for certain. When I got out, I was going to tear their little empire apart. The day I walked out of prison, the air hit me like a wave. Cold, sharp, alive. For the first time in months, I wasn't breathing recycled air or staring at the same four concrete walls. But freedom felt heavier than I expected, because I wasn't stepping out into the life I left. I was stepping into a mess I wasn't sure I could fix. Nathan was there to meet me. He looked older, not by years, by the weight in his face. His eyes wouldn't stay on mine. He hugged me, stiff at first, like he wasn't sure if he deserved to. "You hungry?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, but the truth was I wasn't hungry for food. I was hungry to know what he'd been doing while I was gone. The first week home was strange. Nathan was polite, almost too polite, like he was walking on eggshells. I could see the guilt written all over him, but guilt alone doesn't change a person. I'd seen enough criminals in my career to know that. So I tested him. I asked him to help with chores, run errands, keep me company. I wanted to see if he'd vanish at the first chance to meet those so-called friends. To my surprise, he didn't. Not first. One evening, while we were fixing dinner, he blurted it out, the thing I'd been waiting to hear since the day I was sentenced. "Dad, I'm sorry. I didn't say anything right away. Just let him speak. I should have told you the truth. About everything. I was scared. And I was stupid. And I know what you did for me, even if you never said it. You took the fall." His voice cracked. "Why?" I put down the knife I was using to cut vegetables. "Because you're my son, and I'd rather lose a year of my life than lose you forever." He didn't respond, just nodded and turned back to the stove, wiping his eyes when he thought I wasn't looking. That was the first crack in his walls. The next step was getting him out of the environment that had nearly destroyed him. I signed him up for a rehabilitation and mentorship program, part counseling, part skills training. It wasn't easy. The first few sessions, he came home silent, sulking, but slowly I started to notice changes. He was eating better, sleeping more, even sketching again, little doodles at first, then more complex designs. But as much as I was rebuilding my son, I hadn't forgotten the other half of the equation. The boys who'd pulled him into that life were still out there, still operating, still preying on kids like him. And I wasn't going to let them keep doing it. I didn't go after them right away. You can't rush a takedown. In law enforcement, we learned that the best way to catch a predator isn't to run at them head on. It's to let them get comfortable. Let them think no one's watching. I started small. I asked around. Old contacts, street informants, even a few people I'd arrested before who still owed me favors. It didn't take long to piece together the picture. They weren't just kids messing around. They were part of a small but organized theft ring, stealing goods, selling them to a fence, and using the money to fund parties, drugs, and whatever else kept them feeling untouchable. Their leader, a wiry kid named Trey, had a reputation for being smart but reckless. The kind of guy who thought he was bulletproof because no one had ever caught him. I made a promise to myself right then. I was going to be the one to end his streak. For weeks, I gathered evidence quietly. I followed them from a distance, never close enough for them to notice, but close enough to see their patterns. Tuesday nights? Always the same gas station parking lot. Thursday afternoons? Hanging around a warehouse on the edge of town. Weekends? Hitting parties where half the crowd was drunk enough to talk about things they shouldn't. I took notes, photos, recordings, everything I need to build a case that no lawyer could punch holes in. But I didn't stop there. I wanted more than just arrests. I wanted humiliation. I wanted them to feel the same crushing weight my son had felt when his life started unraveling. One night, I followed Trey and his crew to a rundown pawn shop. I watched from my car as they unloaded boxes from the trunk, electronics, jewelry, even power tools. The next morning, I paid a visit to the shop owner. He wasn't thrilled to see me, but when I laid out my evidence, he cracked fast. I didn't even have to threaten him, just reminded him what happens to businesses caught dealing in stolen goods. By the time I left, I had signed statements, transaction records, and a list of every stolen item that had passed through his hands in the last 6 months. At home, Nathan noticed I was spending more time out at odd hours. He didn't ask questions, but I could see it in his eyes. He knew I was working on something. One night, he caught me reviewing photos at the kitchen table. "Those are them, aren't they?" he asked quietly. I didn't answer right away. "Dad, you don't have to do this." I met his gaze. "Yes, you do." And in that moment, I think he understood. This wasn't about revenge for me. It was about protecting him and every other kid that might drag down next. By the end of the month, I had enough to bury Trey and his entire operation. But I wasn't ready to hand it over yet. Not until I had one final piece, proof that tied them directly to the bigger thefts, the kind that would mean serious prison time. That opportunity came sooner than I expected. A tip came in from an old friend still on the force. Trey was planning a major job, bigger than anything they'd done before. If I played it right, I could catch them red-handed. I started preparing. Camera batteries charged. Audio recorders hidden. A plan in place that would end everything they'd built. The reckoning was coming. The night of the takedown, the air felt different. Crisper. Charged. Like the whole town was holding its breath. I've been waiting for this moment for months, playing a quiet, patient game while they strutted around thinking they were untouchable. Not tonight. According to my source, Trey's crew was planning to hit a private estate just outside of town. The owners were wealthy and away for the weekend. The kind of job that, if it went right, would set them up for months. And if it went wrong, it would end them. I arrived early and parked far enough down the road that my truck was hidden by a stand of trees. I'd already coordinated with one of my old partners, a guy I trusted to handle things by the book once I handed him the package. But this part was mine. At exactly 11:17 p.m., the familiar beat-up sedan rolled past me, headlights dimmed. For figures inside, I watched them pull into the long driveway, kill the engine, and slip out with bags and tools. They didn't know I was already 2 steps ahead. I'd placed hidden cameras on the property earlier that afternoon, tucked into gutters and porch lights. Every move they made was being recorded in crystal clarity. From my position, I could see them working the back door, Trey giving orders in a low voice, the others moving like they'd done this 100 times. And then I stepped out of the shadows. "Evening, boys." The reaction was priceless. 3 of them froze. One dropped his crowbar with a metallic clatter. Trey turned slowly, his smirk faltering when he recognized me. "Well, if it isn't Officer Daddy," he sneered, trying to recover. "Shouldn't you be, I don't know, rotting somewhere?" I stepped closer, letting the security light catch my face. "It's Lieutenant Daddy to you, and I've been busy." For a moment, no one moved. The wind rustled through the trees, and I could hear one of them breathing fast. "You're trespassing," Trey said, his voice wobbling just slightly. "So are you," I replied, nodding toward the door they just pried open. "Difference is, I've got about 6 months of evidence stacked against you, and it's all going to the right people." One of the younger ones couldn't have been more than 19, swore under his breath, and took off, running toward the car. Trey didn't chase him. He knew it was over. The sound of sirens began faint and distant, then grew louder. My partner had been waiting for my signal, and the cameras had already transmitted live footage to the department. I stepped back as the cruisers pulled in, their red and blue lights washing over the property like a tidal wave. Officers spilled out, weapons drawn, voices sharp and commanding. One by one, Trey's crew went down, hands on the ground, zip ties clicking tight around their wrists. When Trey was finally cuffed, he turned his head toward me. "You think you've won?" he spat. I crouched, so we were eye level. "I don't think, Trey." "I know." The aftermath was swift. The pawn shop owner rolled over completely, giving detailed testimony about every stolen item he'd bought from them. My evidence, photos, recordings, transaction logs, sealed the case like a coffin lid. Trey and 2 of his guys faced multiple felony charges: burglary, possession of stolen property, conspiracy. The youngest? The DA offered him a deal if he testified against the others. He took it. The theft ring was dismantled in weeks. When I got home after the arrests, Nathan was waiting for me in the living room. I didn't say a word at first, just dropped the small USB drive on the coffee table. "What's that?" he asked. "The end," I said simply. He plugged it into his laptop, watched as the footage played, his old friends, caught in the act, faces pale under the glare of the cameras. When it was over, he looked at me, his eyes wide. You did this for me?" I sat down across from him. "I did this for every kid they were going to hurt next. But yeah, mostly for you." He swallowed hard, his voice rough. "I don't deserve." "Stop," I cut in. "You made mistakes. Big ones. But you've got a second chance. I can't live your life for you, Nathan. But I can make sure you've got the space to live it right." He didn't say anything else. Just nodded and sat back, staring at the paused image on the screen. Weeks later, we stood together in the backyard, tossing a football like we used to. It wasn't the same as before, maybe it never would be, but there was something in his smile that told me we were finding our way back. As for me, I didn't regret a thing. Not the time in prison. Not the long nights gathering evidence. Not even the moment I stepped out of the shadows to face Trey. Because sometimes being a father means protecting your child from others. And sometimes it means protecting them from themselves. Justice had been served. And this time it was personal. Asterisk. In the end, I learned something I wish every parent knew. Loving your child isn't just about giving them everything they want. It's about standing by them when they've lost their way, even if it means sacrificing a piece of yourself in the process. I went to prison for my son, but I came out with more than I lost. I came out with the chance to give him a future. And when justice finally caught up with the people who tried to destroy him, I knew it wasn't just revenge, it was redemption. If this story gave you chills, smash that like button. It tells YouTube this is the kind of story worth sharing. And I want to hear from you. What's the most powerful act of love or justice you've ever witnessed? Drop it in the comments below. And of course, if you want more stories like this, the kind that hit you right in the heart but leave you smiling in the end, make sure to subscribe because we got a lot more where this came from. This is Justice Served Revenge. And remember, the best revenge is living a life they can never destroy.